Welcome, everybody, to the Claudepocalypse edition of Legal Tech Week. It's February 6, 2026. This is the show where we talk about the top stories in legal tech and innovation. And this week, the top story was Claude entering the legal field to some extent. If you don't know what I'm talking about, stay tuned because we're going to be talking a lot about that, I think, today. Here to help us talk about all the week's news are our usual panel of experts. And kick it off today with Victor, because Victor, I wanted to not only have you introduce yourself, but you've got some news of your own to announce. I thought you should share
Oh,
that.
thank you. Yeah, my name is Victor Lee. I'm assistant managing editor for the ABA Journal. And yeah, thanks for teaming me up. The news is my book published I guess at the end of January technically, although I'm not still not entirely sure about that. But I do have the ebook version. I think I'm getting the 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 hardback versions at some point. But yeah, it's about there was a very arcane topic. There's a Supreme Court nomination in 1930 that was the first time grassroots groups were able to defeat a nominee. This person's name is John J. Parker, and so the book is called Supreme Pressure. This is the version of it. Um, Supreme Pressure: The Rejection of John J. Parker and the Birth of the Modern Supreme Court Confirmation Process, and basically talks about that specific nomination, but also how it was influenced by prior failed nominations and prior confirmation battles, and how it influenced confirmation battles going forward, including Robert Bork and some of the more controversial ones that we've had. So, it's unfortunately it's an academic title, so price point's pretty high. But feel free to request it at your local library. And if you have, actually, one thing I've noticed is that if you have alumni access to certain databases, it is available on the Springer Nature database, which is the book would then be free for people who are subscribed to it. So check it out.
Bork from Orc in the comments. Yeah. Well, that's really cool. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Um, and
Not tech related at all, though.
not tech related at all, right? So that's probably about all we'll say about it for the rest of the show. Um, and also here today, let's go around. Caroline, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, congratulations, Victor. That's amazing. Yeah, Caroline Hill, non-published author, editor of Legal IT Insider over in the UK, and happy to be here. Nice to see you all.
And your predecessor at Legal Tea, Charles Christian, was a published author. He wrote a bunch of like science fiction
He
books and
did.
stuff, right? He had some
Yeah,
pretty
he
cool
did.
books, yeah.
He did weird science and urban. He had I think you can probably still find it. It was urban. He was the urban fantasy.
It's on Amazon. I think you can find it.
Yeah, and he used to write like weird tales of folk tales, and yeah, he loved all of that. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. All right. And Steve Embry.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Embry. I publish the blog Tech Law Crossroads. I also write for Above the Law and for the ABA Law Technology Today blog. And I'd also like to offer my congratulations to Victor. That's quite an accomplishment. Really great.
That's cool. All right. And Joe.
Joe Patrice from Above the Law and the Thinking Like a Lawyer podcast. I am not a published author, but I am published in the latest drop of the Epstein Files, if you saw that. So that was exciting. Not in any
I'm
bad
not sure
way.
I'm not sure that's something we want to congratulate you on.
But
I'm
yes,
surprised they didn't
somebody.
expunge your name.
Well, I mean, it's also entirely. It was entirely non-responsive. There's no reason this should be in here. It was a newsletter where we had a story about him years after his death. So there's not really a reason it would be responsive to anything that was being asked for. But whatever, some FBI agent subscribes to the newsletter. That's what we learned.
And the newsletter also had Nikki Black's name in it too,
Nikki
right? The
Black
same
is
way.
in it
So
too.
both
Yeah,
of you made it into the Epstein files.
it's true.
All right. And Stephanie, I'm pretty sure you're not in the Epstein files.
No, although there is a very prominent Wilkins in the Epstein files. It is not it is not me. I'm Stephanie Wilkins, Director of Content at Legal Tech Hub, and maybe one day I'll be a published author. When people like Victor do that, it inspires me to get back to writing. So congratulations and thank you for the inspiration.
Yeah, it has to be like an academic book. I mean, I used to write, I wrote a couple books about the internet, and it was like, it made no sense because by the time the book came out, everything had
Mhm.
changed and everything I had written was way out of date. And it just seemed like a complete waste of time. And that's kind of why I started blogging way back when, because that was a better way to keep things current. But yeah, books about tech are hard to write and hard to keep current.
In 1930 seemed
Um,
like
yeah,
a safe thing.
yeah, and timely. Um, all right, well, so this week we had the the Claudepocalypse, as I referred to it earlier, but I'm sure, unless you've been kind of living in a legal tech cave, you've heard about it. But Anthropic launched Claude Cowork, which is this sort of agentic coding platform, and then released a little group of plugins that you could use on it, focused on different business functions. And one of those was essentially contract review and contract management. So it was the initial first time ever that Claude or any of the sort of foundational AI models had sort of specifically released a legal focused product application, whatever you want to call it. And the fallout was kind of crazy. We all saw, the most publicly recognized part of this was the fact that stocks plunged in a number of major legal tech companies, Relics, Thomson Reuters, Wolters Kluwer, others. And, I mean, some people can debate whether that was the precipitating event for the stocks falling or the fact that a lot of tech stocks were just falling this week anyway, apart from all of that. Um, but it did seem like there was this kind of widespread panic that took over the legal market over this. And, I think the panic is in part what we've all been kind of speculating about, which is at what point do the foundational models get into legal tech? Why aren't they getting into legal tech? What are they waiting for? Is that going to happen? And if that happens, how much of a threat are they to the incumbents, everything from Thomson Reuters to Harvey to Lagora to all of the others out there? So I don't know. What are your? I'd love to hear all of your. I know a bunch of you all wrote about this. What do you think? Is this the is this the end of legal tech as we know it?
No.
Okay, good. Let's move on
Yes.
to the next topic.
We're just doing no, yes, yes, no.
No, I mean, it's a notable development. It's something we all assumed would come eventually, but the capabilities thus far are far from wiping legal tech off the map. So, I mean, developers should take note. They should figure out how to have a moat around their product. They should figure out what they offer, but it's not these, what, 6 plugins or whatever are not, it's not the death of legal tech.
I think
Yet.
the surprise, I don't know I don't know why there was surprise. Like that was one of the big comments, why is this such a surprise? Why are the markets taken by surprise? It knocked the value that was knocked off was extraordinary from the big publishing companies, Relics, Thomson Reuters, like you mentioned, Bob. Um, it wasn't really a surprise. That doesn't mean to say I don't think that it's not significant, particularly for the in-house market. I think that it's different. Like, so the publishing companies, the big, TR Relics, etc., Clio with VLEX, etc., can say they've got a huge amount of data, but and the new Claude Cowork plugin, legal plugin, it's not, I don't think it's competing in the same space. That doesn't mean to say, me personally, I'd love to know what everyone else thinks, but it's not significant. If you look at the in-house legal market, I was at Clock yesterday in Europe. A lot of them are using mainstream tools anyway, by show of hands as to who's using what. A lot of them are using mainstream. And so this is really significant. I spoke to one in-house, a legal ops head, a significant corporate, who's, I've yet to check quotes. But and this is sensitive, but they say this is potentially hugely significant for the in-house legal market. He's excited about it. And they talk about democratizing, and there's an element of this I think the word I used actually, it was democratizing, tools, making this really accessible. So in some ways, it's a really positive thing.
Yeah, I don't know that I terribly disagree with you, Stephanie. But you said no, and I said yes really quick.
I know.
I don't think at the present moment that's the case. To me, the significance is what it portends for the future, and
Sure.
these large language models getting into the legal market, first a toehold, then a bigger hold. And Caroline, I think you said something really significant when you said that it's really beneficial to the in-house counsel. And I was thinking, true, that probably means that in-house counsel will do more things in-house and less referring things outside as well. And so I wondered if in addition to getting into the legal tech space, this also sort of suggests that these models at some point will go even further and hold themselves as legal tools to replace some of the work done by, or much of the work done by lawyers, because they can. And it's, always before there were some barriers to entry to non-legal tech companies because it wasn't a huge market, and it took a long time to learn it, to understand it, to figure out what you had to have. It's kind of ironic that these large language model tools can now reduce that learning time, that understanding time to the point where it may make it much more worthwhile to get there. The other thing I was going to follow up, Bob, with what you said, from what I've been reading, it's not just the legal tech vendor stock prices that are starting to plunge. It's kind of precipitating a plunge across the board for all sorts of AI related companies and platforms. Just watching the news today, and it's looking a little scary out there. So it may suggest or be a symptom of not only the legal tech market being overvalued, but a lot of the AI market in general being overvalued.
That's why you should keep your
it
investments in
definitely,
Bitcoin.
well, it definitely touches on a lot of things that we've been talking about on this show a lot. Because I'm glad, thanks for bringing it up, Carolyn, about the people using the mainstream tools. Because I mean, thinking about it, when I first heard it, I was like, all right, well, so what? Like, big deal. Like most legal professionals, like lawyers and whatnot, you think they would still use like like the more proprietary tools and the more the more specialized tools, right? But then with what Caroline was saying about all the people who raised their hands about people who use like the mainstream tools, that got me thinking like, oh yeah, you know what? A lot of people do still use ChatGPT for drafting memos and drafting, maybe taking first passes at things and whatnot. Even if they might have access to some of these more expensive tools, maybe they don't. I don't know. But so if Claude comes along and like just supercharges that, then yeah, would it just be even more of a incentive for them to stick to using those tools as opposed to then going to like a like a co-counsel or or Vincent or one of those things. But so that was interesting. And then also like the idea of like, because you would think like, well, this sandbox is probably big enough for all these other AI companies, right? Why would the entry of one AI company then cause everyone else to stock the tank? But then there's a whole like, I guess this whole arms race going on that one thing comes in and then everyone else gets hurt. And someone brought up DeepSeek in the chat, and it was like kind of like that when DeepSeek first came out. Everyone freaked out about what that would mean for other AI tools. So yeah, I mean, I guess it does kind of add on to a lot of what we've been talking about on the show. This idea of like all these companies feel like they need to be first off the mark, or they need to at least be the market leader.
And I think the
Yeah, I
reason I
thought
said no so quickly is because I feel like all of the knee-jerk reactions about this and the panic out there are treating legal tech as this monolith. And it's not at all. Certainly, there are certain kinds of legal tech tools that are going to be under much earlier and more direct threat from this than a lot of others. And so that's why I have this thought of like, we've wiped out all of legal tech. Oh, we might as well write it off right now. To me, that was just a ridiculously quick overreaction.
Yeah.
sure,
Julie,
there's a
what's-
lot of I mean,
Julie.
there's a lot of them that are just pure dumb rappers, and those people are in trouble. But like the big people who lost a lot of money on the market, those people are not those things.
But it's just, I mean,
Well,
this is a little bit of the the sort of the camel's nose under the tent. I mean, to me, again, I don't think it's right now. It's not the end of legal tech, but isn't the what it portends is really kind of more the issue. The idea that all of these legal tech companies are saying, you said people accuse Harvey of being just a rapper, and they say, we're not a rapper because we understand workflows, we understand the legal market, and that's what distinguishes us. And then, Claude comes along and says, look, we can understand the legal market a little bit too, and this is just a first step, but what's the potential out there? What could this eventually be?
Well,
Michelle,
and the other piece of that, Bob, too, is the price competition that Claude can offer. I mean, let's face it, a lot of these private tools are very expensive, particularly for small firms. And if these large language public tools can do the job for what, $20 a month per person, that's going to be pretty tempting to lots of people.
but Michelle makes a point that, I think we've all been thinking, which is there's also an element of, we've seen this before. This all may be new in terms of large language models, but in terms of big tech entering legal and, the success or otherwise, we've seen it before. It's kind of new, but it's not new, and I kind of feel that there'll be some patterns repeated.
Yeah,
But the
but the
same
difference now
reason.
is the ability of the large language models to undertake the learning necessary to understand the market in such a short period of time.
But what would be so curious is to absolutely take your point, but the argument of, in fact, Max from Legora and I believe Winston from Harvey have already said on LinkedIn, that they've built the platform, the workflows, the infrastructure, for want of a better description, around it that gives people comfort. And they've obviously got integrations, and they understand the world, and they hire lawyers, and there's all sorts of, and I'm missing a ton of stuff as to why they would say, that may not, to Andrew's point, give them a moat. That's very much up for debate, but it makes it quite different to these sort of legal plugins, which, as I started out by saying, I think that there's going to be a huge place for them, but it's just, I think there'll be different bits of the market that it will appeal to.
And security
How
is a big
hard
thing
I
they're
can
talking
only
about. I mean, Stephanie, you talked about this in your article right up on this, but just the security and governance issues that's where right now the legal tech companies have an edge.
just to
Yeah, but
harken
also,
back to Harvey and ChatGPT. I wrote an article, I guess it was back in October, about a podcast interview of Weinberg, and that was frankly one of his worries, that OpenAI, on which their work depends, would jump into the market. And given Harvey's and their ability to predict where everything's going and success, that was what made me start to really think it could happen. And on the security end of things, I think that is where right now where the legal tech vendors have an edge. But I would assume that if the big players want to get in, they're going to solve that problem. And once that's solved, then that you don't have that argument for your price point being significantly higher.
Hey,
yeah.
Julie.
Can't they solve that problem? Hi, everybody.
Julie.
As usual, I'm late for no good reason. This time it was tech issues. Yeah, just piggybacking on that, I'm just thinking of, with Microsoft and the issues they had, and enterprise licensing. Like, I don't think security is going to be an issue that's going to prevent them from 5 or 10 years from now being a significant player in the legal tech market. I don't know if you guys mentioned this analogy before, but similar to what we saw with the ODR market in Zoom and Microsoft Teams, like all of that has been completely disrupted by this mainstream technology. And people talked about security and all those things, and courts just adapted because it was cheaper. It was
Good
cheaper
point.
for the courts to use Zoom and Teams than to buy expensive ODR software. Look, the biggest market that people actually have to think about is what Steve mentioned, which is the small solo firms. This is a great price point for them. And then not to mention all the folks who are working in access to justice and in the public sphere. This is a great price point. And I said this years ago at a I think it was an ABA Tech show that I'm waiting for a company to eat our lunch. And hey, it's Claude. I thought it would be an Amazon or maybe an Apple, but I guess it's Anthropic. But yeah, I think some of these major like, does it mean it's happening today? No. But does it mean it would never happen? No. We already have articles of lawyers who are saying their preferred LLM is ChatGPT. More than Harvey or Clear or all the others. That's already happening now.
Mhm.
So I was at Clock, Julie. I was saying yesterday, Clock Europe, and there was a panel. One of the panelists was head of legal ops at Rio Tinto, Chris DeWath. And the other panelists were doing the other head of legal ops were using legal AI tools. And Chris was they used ChatGPT Enterprise. And they were talking about ROI and how you prove ROI. And he was being a tiny bit deliberately flippant, but just saying, well, the ROI just takes care of itself and there is a cost to enterprise. But, he was saying then they talk in terms of adoption and use cases and all of this kind of stuff. But I mean, it was an interesting point.
I also took issue a little bit with just the idea that the investor reaction was an actual sign of anything happening, because a lot of these investors, I mean, I'm not saying, I mean, I think they're two separate issues. Like, there are reasons to be concerned here, but like we've said for a long time, though, that there's tons of investors getting involved in legal AI that don't know anything about the technology whatsoever. They just want to put their money on the AI. And so when they saw this, they equally panicked out of lack of understanding in the other direction. So I don't think the market has rebounded. And I don't think that price drop, while notable, is a, death knell, like, or a sign that I
Yeah,
thought that wasn't the right trigger. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the conclusion of my article, was that the main takeaway you should have is that if the investor class responds to a bot that uses Wikipedia for legal research as wiping out all this value, then it's possible that the investor class is completely out of their minds, which is not bode well for anything. And that has serious implications too, right? Like, if the investor class is this clueless, it's going to lead to bad development in other directions too. Like, there are real problems. And this was scary to me, that was the reaction, because it suggested that, other problems are deeper in this, because, a lot of this happens based on what investors say.
I think that they're really, so actually someone's just made the point I was going to make. I think they're really jittery. I think that's the word I was thinking jittery. They said jumpy in the chat. This AI bubble concept. There's lots of things at play, aren't there, other than just this, I think.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
going to make the same point. Like, I've been waiting for a moment like this where the market freaks out and starts selling for no good reason. Again, I didn't think it would be our piece of the tech pie that is legal tech, but hey, okay. Like, this is definitely the year where people are very uncertain. There's a lot of retail investors and others who know nothing about our market who are in this space. So um I'm not surprised by the market reaction, to be honest. I figured at some point there would be something that would, like you said, make people jittery. Long term, I don't think there's any reason for people to jump ship, but I do think, like you were saying, Joe, in the most beautiful way, right, with the bots and Wikipedia, that there are other underlying issues that are way more important to think about.
Yeah, just follow up on Joe's point. We actually wrote an article on that very thing. Well, it came out maybe a month or so ago, and had talked to a venture capitalist who voiced the very same concerns, that so many investors were just leaping in, and it wasn't so much on legal tech. It was more applicable to some of the infrastructure investments that are being made. But same concept. They don't understand what they were getting into, and so not understanding it, when something bad happens, boom, time to cut and run.
Yeah. I think it's also worth thinking about the fact that the legal tech market, in sort of very loose, broad terms, is kind of bifurcated. There are the legal tech products that are sort of data based, like legal research products, and then there are the legal tech products that are more kind of document workflow based, like contract review products. And I mean, this plugin just kind of falls into that contract review side, and it's really kind of basically a very rudimentary plugin. This is not like a sophisticated tool. It's probably something you could almost do yourself without the plugin, using almost any generative AI tool. But I mean, that side of the market is much more susceptible to, I think, the foundation models kind of coming into that, because it's much more fits much better with what they natively and naturally do in terms of being able to analyze documents. Whereas the data side of it has always been, I think, will continue to be a much greater challenge, because they don't have access to that data. I mean, that's Joe's Wikipedia, analogy. I mean, if they're drawing their legal research on Wikipedia, that's not going to get them very far. And until they get the
Which
kind
they
of
were.
data, yeah, but until they get the kind
Yeah.
of data that a Lexis or a Thomson Reuters or now a Clio has, then they're not going to make great inroads on that side of the market.
Yeah, I guess I would just sort of point out it's almost a cliche to say that the generative AI platforms and ability is as bad today as it's ever going to be, meaning it's only going to get better. And so to me, the significance of this is if the big players are targeting the legal marketplace, this first step is not going to be the last step. I mean, they're going to try to solve all the problems that we've been talking about and be competitive. I don't know how they can solve all of them, but if they decide to, and what I read the other day, that the abilities of the generative AI tools are increasing, what, 7 times a month almost in their abilities. I don't know if that's true or not, but they certainly are increasing, and the increasing this is problematic for a lot of people in the vendor space, or could
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, I don't know if, like you said, I don't know if those claims are true, but what I do know is true is never underestimate tech companies' ruthlessness in getting data. And
Right.
just look at the healthcare and what's going on there in terms of Gen AI and you want to talk about sensitive data and they're able to get their hands on that stuff and there's lots of other from defense to other industries where really there's a lot of barriers, financials another good one too. So look, I wouldn't bet against LLMs getting legal data. I'm not saying I know how it's going to happen or when, but I don't know if I would bet against these
Well,
giant companies.
as Lydia mentions, there's free law. OpenAI is already doing stuff with Free Law Project. Free Law Project is selling its data to all sorts of different commercial companies these days. And or there's or you're Clio and you acquire VLX with a whole bunch of data. So there's various ways of going about that. All right, we got a couple of stories this week that I put under the category of AI agents gone wild. And one of them it comes from Julie of AI agents forming their own social network.
Oh yes, this fun story.
I love
So
this story.
so I found out there's a company called OpenClaw who's doing AI agent stuff, super great, and they have created this other social media app. It's very similar to Reddit, and I don't know if we've got Reddit fans here. But basically the AI agents can chat with each other in that space. There's a lot of articles about this in terms of whether this is real or not. And I can't believe I'm the one who put this article in there, but you guys have other interesting articles this week. But we had to talk about this because we were already talking about it in our chat. But what I found really interesting about the article is, of course, there's two things that everyone should know, like as a lawyer who's following AI. First of all, not everything is what it seems. So first of all, are these AI agents actually autonomously talking to one another? That's a big question mark, and I think the article really goes into all of that. And then the second thing is the security, right? This seems to be platforms that are very easy to hack and to mimic behavior. And so that's really important to know because when we're talking about AI agents who are able to initiate and do tasks on their own, and then they've got a social media platform to do that, that's where we do get into to the, you know, wonderful sci-fi films of the machines taking over and conquering us. But it talks a little bit more about like why we should be careful when we're going and looking at it. So I personally haven't logged into it yet because after reading the articles, I was like, this may not be safe to go into. But I thought it was
go in it. No, I will not go in it. I don't. Nope.
It flagged. If I went to look at it and it flagged up, it was like, this is not safe.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. And I wonder if people believe, first of all, do people actually believe these AI agents are talking to one another? I'm extremely skeptical about this, extremely skeptical. But also, I find it interesting
There are
that this
humans
story
in the
went
loop
viral.
pulling the strings, you have to think, right?
Well,
Absolutely.
no, but didn't Google have that issue with this is before this is just even with like I don't remember exactly what it was, but yeah, no, didn't Google have this issue with some of their bots like communicating with each other with its own language, and this is this was before agents and whatnot. I mean, so yeah, no, it's definitely possible.
Well, I think that's more so I guess when I say that, I guess I'm thinking more of that was built into the programming, right? So in the same way, there were a long time ago bots who were also being trained off of social media. So I'm thinking Twitter and those places, and then they had to shut them down because they inevitably started saying, you know, racist, sexist things. It's the same thing as them talking to one another, and you know, how do they know a language that we didn't teach them? Well, you program them to learn things, right? This is the machine learning. So to me, that's actually part of the function of what it's built to do, as opposed to people taking a giant leap and saying, "Oh, we're getting really close to them," you know, with their consciousness and all this kind of stuff. So I think to myself, I could program bots to talk to each other and mimic social media behavior. Is that something that's groundbreaking in terms of AI agents? I would say no.
Yeah, there was not that I want people to listen to other podcasts, but there were two podcasts relevant to this. One was the current, the Kevin Roos podcast, like in the name of it, the Hard Fork. I don't know if you're listening to their Hard Fork, but their current, this week's episode is like all about this. They go into it, and they actually do go in and kind of explore some of the conversations in there, and it's pretty interesting. But the other one I've mentioned on this show a few times, which is this podcast Shell Game, which is all about this journalist who attempts to start a company run entirely by AI agents. And the results are not at all successful and fairly comic at times. And if you're worried about AI agents taking over the world, I feel like you have to listen to Shell Game, and your fears will be somewhat allayed, at least for the time being. They're not quite up there yet, but
Wasn't there some talk about why are they communicate in English, right? On Maltbook. Like what?
yeah.
There was like a conversation about why would they do that? Like,
Well, that's one of the things is supposedly there's also this thing that AI agents are now creating their own language so they can
Yeah.
talk to each other without us understanding what they're
yeah,
saying.
there was a post about that. That's so funny.
Well, that was Victor's point, right? We've seen that behavior before where they talk to each other in a different language or like a dead language or a language we don't understand. So yeah, the fact that they're talking in English, I'm like, oh, this is like obviously fake, but I'm interested.
It's very funny.
So related to this was Steve's story, also involving
Rent a human.
conspiratorial AI agents, I guess. But
I don't know if it's conspiratorial. It's a rent a human. Actually, Damian Reel put me onto this. He posted something about it. There was a article in Futurism, which is a newsletter of limited maybe. Well, I don't know how notoriety is. But it was written coincidentally by Joe Wilkins. I don't know if that's any relation, Stephanie, but
All of these
seem to be
Wilkins
a
is
lot of
coming out of the woodwork, and I don't know any of them.
but this guy came up with this this rent a human concept where the AI agent would search out a human. Actually, humans would apply. They would put their profile in the bot, and then if there was a task to be done that required a human, like pick up a package, the AI would find the right human and, in a sense, contract with the human. The human would go do it, would be instructed by the AI agent, and then the human would show proof of completion and get paid in all things in Bitcoin, which was kind of funny in and of itself, but. But the article, the funny part about it, the article was it talked about the humans being able to do some of the busy work that might otherwise require an agent, which we've now sort of flipped from where we started with, like the AI being able to do the busy work that humans don't like to do, to now the humans are doing the busy work that the AI agents don't like to do. But you start thinking about some of these tasks that, like a routine court appearance, where you just need a lawyer to go to the court and stand up and say, we submitted an agreed order, Your Honor. Or, I mean, there's a lot of things that could be done, that lawyers do, that really don't require a tremendous amount of expertise other than showing up. So now we have the rent a human. The article also talked about how this would be a human would engage an AI agent to do certain tasks, certain jobs, certain collection of jobs, and then the AI agent would then go rent out the human to do some of those tasks that it could not do, which is also kind of an interesting concept. So it's the AI agent is now the middle person. So it was all kind of crazy, I thought, but pretty interesting stuff.
And
Like
then
when
they're all
you're
going to
Maybe the
go over to
agents.
Moltbook and talk about how
Let's
malleable
go,
we all
right.
are.
Right. They're gonna rate us in Molbook.
But with your court appearance example, I feel like we're just back to the do not pay stunt from 2 years ago. Like we're just come full circle.
Yeah. Or like
Well,
or like
but
Garfield AI.
the notion would be that I would tell the bot, hey, I'm Steve Embry, I'm in this certain location. If there's a miscellaneous court appearance that just requires somebody to show up in court and not really have much knowledge, I'm your guy. And so I would actually go do it, but I would be pretty limited in what I would do and be able to do. And there's not a whole lot of, well, there's probably still some market for some of that stuff. I mean, it's you know rural jurisdictions where you have to drive a long distance and you get there and you don't have to do anything but stand up. And so anyway, it's kind of an
It
interesting
throws
development.
open some interesting, that Garfield AI, they were talking about ownership, and we've obviously got a lot of deregulation in the UK, and Garfield is an AI law firm, but there was a lot of emphasis, so it's been licensed, and it's AI first, but there was a lot of emphasis on it's owned by people, and you sort of think, if Steve's, if that sort of model were to move forward, there'd be some really interesting questions around licensing, and I don't know, it sort of throws open sort of autonomy, and there'd be so many questions to answer.
I feel
All right.
like I'm trying to remember an article about this, like, like one day we're gonna have an autonomous AI agent who wants to be licensed to a bar. I don't know. Also, I agree with the chat. This just sounds like a really sophisticated way to do phishing scams or catfish scams, just to be a little, yeah.
All right. Well, another legal tech adjacent sort of story, I guess, this week was maybe a redactions gone wild story, thanks to the latest posting of the Epstein files. Joe, you talked about that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, there continues to be. If you have spent any time in those files, which I have, not, and that's how we found out that we're there. But while we're talking a lot about these law firms and the trouble that they're getting into for their various conversations, you start seeing just weird redactions. I wrote an article about Jones Day was involved with Ghislaine Maxwell, something that was previously not disclosed, but we now have access to her wire transfers and know she was paying their retainers and replenishing their retainers. So they must have been working there. But just it's arbitrary. On one document, the name of the person is redacted, but the salutation doesn't redact their actual first name. And then on the next email, the email is there and not redacted. It seems like it's completely haphazard. It's a sort of thing that you would get fired for in the actual world of discovery. And it's more than that. You can see in some of these documents, one that's making the social media rounds right now is where somewhere in the middle of a sentence, the word don't is clearly redacted. Why is don't redacted? The suspicion, which I think is probably accurate, is that it was somebody who didn't put the apostrophe there, so it was Don space T, and that they're using an algorithm to nuke mentions of Don any other letters after, and T any other letters after. Uh, this is interesting just to kind of watch discovery in action and being done by people who clearly don't know what the hell they're doing. And like as somebody who goes to these shows and sees these tools where people are doing discovery who know what the hell they're doing, it's very fascinating to me.
And then they didn't redact the stuff they should have redacted. I mean, it's like
Oh
they
yeah,
redacted inappropriate, I mean, totally harmless stuff and then left nude pictures and names and social security numbers and stuff in there.
yeah. I mean, it seems as though it's almost as though the edict had come down that they needed to care more about, say, Don space T showing up than whether or not they were putting out their information about victims or anything like that. We're supposed to be under seal or anything like that.
The one I love best was the dog's name, where it says, quote, I spent an hour walking redacted and then another hour bathing her, blow drying her, and brushing her. I hope she smells better.
Yeah, yeah. It's such
Protect
a
the
mess.
dog.
And meanwhile, Paul Weiss has a new leader because you can't have emails with Jeffrey Epstein about how much fun you have at their events, even if those events were not the bad kind of events, but you can't be having those conversations anyway and expect to keep your job.
What did
We'll
they name a new
see if,
person, or was just or was just like Brad
yeah,
Karp stepped down? Oh, they named someone new.
yeah,
Oh,
no.
Yeah.
So Barchet's taken over, which means it's going to be the first time Paul Weiss is run by a non-litigator. So we'll see if that has implications for that firm's future.
I mean, I
that's
felt
crazy
that
because
small,
Karp been there since what, 2008, 2007, or something ridiculous like that.
It's
long
18
time, yeah.
years.
It's crazy.
Yeah, 18 years, which is, a, a number that did not come up very much in the actual Epstein files. Uh,
Wow.
His
Wow.
his reign as chairman was too old for him,
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
allegedly.
I couldn't
Allegedly.
decide whether we should feel sympathy for the poor Department of Justice employees who had to go through all this stuff. I mean, but even again, the fact that there could be things like social security numbers getting through and
Yeah.
just stuff like, I mean, there are programs that can do at least that much. I mean, maybe some of
Yes.
this is hard, but some of it shouldn't be all that hard. So,
I'm
I
I'm
mean,
I'm genuinely
yeah.
confused that like there are e-discovery tools out there that are not sophisticated that could I'm just genuinely confused.
Yes.
Did they just like tell four people you're in charge of these millions of like it feels like they went through it like with a marker, like without any digital tools. And I just
Well, for a
like I'm just
while, it's like people realize that if you highlight if you use your mouse to highlight the redacted part, you could still see like what was underneath it. It's like, well, come on, like
yeah, not
And
for a
that's the
while. That's happened
classic.
recently. Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
classic. You
Right.
that
Right.
happened
still
years
see
ago,
that in
and now
court
hit.
filings.
Well, you know why that's happening again is because the way you get rid of that is with Adobe, which they don't have access to anymore because Elon Musk canceled their Adobe subscription government-wide as part of the Doge thing. So there
I'm
we
so
are.
behind on news. They don't have access to Adobe. This is like
They also
I don't know
canceled
what's a good
Westlaw at one
analogy
point.
to this. It's like I'm a cat and I can't have cat food. How can you be a lawyer and can't have Adobe?
So bad.
that's because Elon was looking for the really big savings, so he canceled Adobe and
That's law.
give himself a
That's
tax
funny.
cut.
All right. Um,
It doesn't feel real. It's just so completely insane. All of it.
I'm looking at our list of other stories, and they all seem kind of not quite as exciting as AI agents gone wild. And what else do we have? We have um, well, I might just talk real quick about the legal services conference that I went to, only because I was the only journalist who went there again. Nobody, apparently no journalists go to it, but this is the Legal Services Corporation does a conference every year called Innovations in Technology, and it's basically focused on the TIG grants, the Technology Initiative grants that the Legal Services Corporation puts out. They have this massive budget of all of $5 million, which is essentially the main source of funding for innovation programs in the legal services community. It's like a drop in the bucket in the investment world, but in the legal services world, that's the bulk of it. And so this conference is really kind of focused on innovation in legal services. But what struck me this year in going to it was lots of talk about things that people are doing with Gen AI, and people are doing a lot of cool things with Gen AI. Although even the cool things are like largely focused on like intake. Like that was a huge topic. There were several programs on software for intake this year because they're trying to, use Gen AI to streamline the intake process and use voice agents. In fact, a couple of different companies are working with legal services companies to help them develop voice agents to handle all the intake, and that frees up staff to do other things. But my take, I focused on this in my article a little bit, was just I thought what was interesting this year was there was also kind of a lot of sort of back to basics talk this year. Like, okay, there's all this AI out there, but maybe we can't afford all this AI. And how do we work better with what we have and the tools we already have? And I thought that was interesting because we get so enamored by the shiny new things sometimes that we forget that we have tools that are quite capable of doing a lot of what we need to get done. And so there was, I went to one panel that was like, they had a couple of knowledge management people there from large firm, and a couple of people from Microsoft, just saying, look, if you've got Microsoft 365, there's a lot of things you can do just using Microsoft 365 without having to go out and buy Harvey or whatever else is out there. And so I just thought that was interesting, and I thought, I kind of wondered if that's something that maybe the legal industry more broadly should almost be doing, which is just, let's set aside all the talk about what AI can do for us and think a little bit more about how we can do better with the tools we already have, because classically legal profession hasn't done very well with the tools it has. I mean, I know I've talked to a lot of founders over the years who say that they'll, products that they have out there, they know that, a large percentage of the features those products have never get used because people don't understand how to use them or don't take the time to learn how to use them. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah.
I think that's a big thing going back to in-house, Bob. I've been speaking to the in-house community a lot at different conferences, and I went to United Lex last year. I reflected back on it recently, and they were saying exactly that. That there are obviously big teams that are buying Harvey or Legora. I've tended in-house seen more of Harvey, but but they were saying, a lot of people don't have the budget, and there's that historic thing that hasn't changed, which is there's still a cost center. And they're sort of reminding one another that they've got access to Copilot, they've got access to enterprise tools that the rest of the business. And actually, what's quite interesting is that for the first time, maybe there's, like certainly when it comes to Copilot, that actually this is going to be super helpful for them. They've struggled with that sort of like dedicated legal tech, but actually now they were saying, there's so much you can do with it. So I think that was quite interesting. I think that applies to everybody as well, everybody, but it was just interesting that community, I think, is really alive to it.
Yeah.
It's an interesting point, Bob, because it's so often people get fixated on generative AI tools and large language model tools when there are a lot of just AI or automation tools out there that can do so much and they don't hallucinate. I mean, they just work. And we sort of feel like sometimes a lot of people have lost sight of the fact that doesn't have to be generative AI to be AI. There's just a lot of things that can be legitimately done without spending a fortune on the new and shiny tool.
Well, and that's what I could touched on this in a column I wrote a couple of weeks ago too. That I mean, it was like Gavel who came out with their new, like very specifically non-AI product. They have an AI legal assistant, and then they came out with a complementary doubling down on automation because they found everyone was starting with the AI tool when they totally didn't need it. It was
Right.
overkill and not even suited. So they they doubled down again on their initial automation, trying to teach people when to use which and how they can work together in a way that makes sense rather than just throwing AI on everything. And I think we'll see more
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We wrote a piece on that too, Stephanie. I remember it was a nice piece you did.
That Joe circulated a cartoon in our Slack channel this week that was sort of
I was
indicative
looking
of
for
this.
that right now. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I can't find it. But yeah,
It was
it's
something to the effect of, I'm an ML scientist, and says to the CEO,
Yes.
there's a whole lot we can do with just good old machine learning.
Yeah.
And like the CEO just starts like breaking up and laughing.
pummeling them.
Yes. I love that cartoon. I was like,
so
yeah,
good.
shout out to the data scientists. I love you all. No, seriously. Like you have so much unstructured data in your law firm. Why do you fix that first before we even talk about Gen AI and, automation? But yes, love the cartoon.
Well, you know what that cartoon reminded me of? You know, in The Simpsons when there was that writer, they were making fun of like writers' rooms, and writers like, why do we keep like why can't we come up with something original? Why can't we, why do we have to keep recycling the old things over and over again? And you see like, this one guy's go over and just beat the crap out of him.
Yeah.
All right. So one other story we had was Victor, yours on should legal AI companies be held liable for deepfakes?
Yeah, so this is an ongoing lawsuit. I guess it's a purported class action in the Northern District of California against X. So I guess what happened was it alleged that their chatbot Grok created and shared highly sexualized deepfake images of women, putting them in like bikinis and lingerie and stuff, which I guess we'll leave the editorializing aside as to why that is the case for Grok. But so this is these people sued them and whatnot, and obviously this case is still ongoing, and who knows if it's even going to be certified? Who knows if it's going to lead to anything? But it does raise interesting questions as to whether or not, like who is responsible for, for these deepfake images? Because I mean, look, what's to stop them from going the next step after that, and making even more sexualized images of people, and then what happens when those start circulating? Because the internet's forever. We all know that. So it raises an interesting question as to who's responsible for this, if anyone can be. And obviously there are safe harbor rules, laws, and whatnot. We'll see if those apply. And we know X will vigorously defend the lawsuit because that's what people with resources and money do. So so it'll be interesting to kind of see where it goes. But yeah, I don't really know if I have a good answer for what I would want to see happen out of this, because I honestly don't. I don't. It's an interesting question as to like, yeah, who is responsible for this when it happens? Like, because I mean, I don't know if you can necessarily put it all on X, or whether it's something in the chatbot that can be fixed, or if this is just a problem that we're gonna have to deal with. I mean, there already are other much worse things out there that can do even worse things. And so, yeah, I don't know if it's just a symptom of this is just a byproduct of AI in general and technology that we're just gonna have to deal with, or whether there is something that can be done. I honestly don't.
Yeah, one of the interesting things I read about it too, and one of the interesting things about the case is they're alleging product liability, that this tool was actually a defective product that was unreasonably dangerous, or led to unreasonably dangerous things. It was the first time I think I've ever seen a developer of one of these programs like Grok sued for under a product's liability theory. So it'd be interesting to see if that works.
And it'd be interesting to see. Obviously, there was this is slightly different, but connected, like the reaction in terms of fixing it. There was a delay, obviously, and you could argue a deliberate delay. In terms of Elon Musk's response, he put a picture of Keir Starmer. So in the UK, we sort of pointed out that this was happening, and he posted a picture of Keir Starmer in a bikini in response to that. Which obviously everyone here found hilarious, but there was there's that arguably in terms of the it's a slightly different point, but in terms of the speed of rectifying it, I would suggest that that could be problematic.
I think that the head of the company posting about how funny it is that it does that is really a problem for their case too.
Right, that's what I mean. I mean, the
Yeah,
Kirsana
yeah.
thing is of a lighthearted, like, the rest of it not funny in terms
Yeah.
of what it was doing, like really not funny. But like the Kirsana thing, I mean, it was funny. But like that delay, this is emerging technology. I mean, there's all sorts of layers of argument, but the delay and the deliberate failure to remedy it when that problem became known, I would think that's problematic.
I like that we just got
In a good way.
the Otter takeaway for our meeting, and it's follow up on the availability of hardback printing of Victor's book. So, were they listening to the rest of the show or not? I mean,
That's a good takeaway. That's a good takeaway.
They took the one thing that wasn't about tech and they
Exactly.
that was it. The show stopped there in the first 3 minutes of the program.
That was the only thing
Speaking of
any
AI
importance.
agents,
No, they really are listening. They're like, no, they're wrong about it. They're wrong about us. But physical books, they can do that. They can, yeah.
there's a whole bunch of Molt book users on Amazon right now looking for Victor's book, hopefully. All right. Well, I know a couple more we didn't get to, but that's okay because we are out of time and we had plenty to talk about today. But we will be back next week, I hope. And I'm sure there'll be lots to talk about then. I'm going to be broadcasting from sunny San Francisco next week. I hope it's sunny. So hope to
Friday
see
the
you all
13th.
next week. Friday the 13th. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Where are you
Awesome.
going to be, Bob?
I am dog sitting for my son for the rest of February. I'm going to be in San Francisco all month.
Nice.
So if you guys, anybody out there is in the area, give me a shout out. Lydia, looking at you. All right.
I'm sure that your son really had to twist your arm to leave
Yeah.
the frozen tundra to go to
That's right.
sunny sand.
Honestly, I would have gone to the frozen
babysit a
tundra to dog
dog?
sit for his dog. I love his dog.
I
So.
know.
well. So Bob, no Super Bowl predictions for this weekend.
Patriots.
Oh.
I mean, what would you expect me to say?
I'm
That's pretty
rooting
much what
for
I
both
expected.
teams to lose. Sorry, I'm a Bears fan. I'm rooting for both teams to lose. I know that's not possible.
I love it.
That's right. Patriots 76, Seattle.
76. Wow.
All right. We'll see everybody next week. Thanks
Look
for
forward to
joining us
seeing
today.
you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Have a nice
Everyone.
weekend, everyone. Bye.